We're doing things a little different today. And I want to chit chat about this whole vibe coding thing, which is apparently the very cringy term that we've landed on to describe the practice of using LLMs to build software, or at the very least, write code. People have obviously been doing this for a while now, and you may have noticed that folks tend to fall into one of two camps, right? On the one hand, you have people saying, it's the future, and you'll be able to build software without ever having to even worry about the code. On the other hand, you have people saying, this stuff writes slop code and it's a recipe for disaster. Now listen, we're all adults here, or at least I think we are, and we know that like many things in life, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. The question is, how big of a pinch of salt do we need here? Well, let's start by breaking down these two opposing arguments, starting with the folks who love vibe coding. So I would agree with them that this is the future, right? Pandora's box has been opened, and the practice of generating code is here to stay. But the idea that you'll never, or at least rarely, have to look at the code ever again, I mean, yeah, sure, until there's an incident and then you're paged in the middle of the night to debug code that you didn't write. I didn't mean for that to rhyme. But what about the naysayers? The phrase I hear all the time is, LLMs just write slop code. But do they? Like, I know in the beginning that was very much the case and it was easy to make fun of, but have you tried them recently? Because it's quite good, right? And when it's not, it's usually the result of one of three things. One reason is if the LLM just doesn't have enough context, maybe it's not looking at the right files, it may produce code that is not optimal. Another reason is if you're using a slightly niche framework or dependency, or it's rather new, then sometimes it just doesn't have the training data to give the right suggestions. And the third reason is if your prompt is too vague or too broad, or even if you're trying to ask it to do too many things. When these three things happen in succession without much like refactoring on your part, then yeah, this is when we get those like comically bloated code bases that people are like, why is my code not working? It's producing tons of errors. That's the sort of slop code that we tend to run into. But there are ways around all of that. You see, the trap that people on both ends of the spectrum fall into is in viewing the generated code as a turnkey solution, and it simply is not. It's a starting point. Let's compare this to other ways of generating code, like such as with like Rails generate scaffold, or even if you're starting up a new Next.js app and you're setting your preferences for how you want your app to be structured. That generates code, but you obviously go in and customize it to fit your needs, right? The difference is that the generated code from some other framework might get you 10% of the way there, whereas LLMs might get you 90%. For the record, I pulled those percentages out of thin air, so don't take that too literally. In my opinion, there are two use cases for using vibe coding. One is to have it do things you already know how to do, but much faster, or use it to learn something. And I mean learn in every sense, right? If you want to sit down with your kid and see if you can like hack together a little video game, that's awesome. That's learning too. It's just called play. Same thing goes for demos and proofs of concept, right? You're just testing out ideas. Now, am I saying that vibe coding is only useful for trivial or non-production use cases? No. But here's the thing. If you want to be using LLMs to build things that are beyond your current capabilities, and you want that to be production ready, then you had better be learning things along the way. Thankfully, LLMs are fantastic educational tools, but you need to be careful because sometimes, they just make things up. So as somebody who is learning something new, how do you vet what it's telling you? How do you vet the code that it generates? The answer is trust but verify. For one thing, any kind of learning that you do through an LLM should also be supplemented with education that is found outside of the AI world, right? Things that actual humans made. So find, some online courses, read the documentation, read blog posts. Now let's say that it generates you some code. A great way to vet this is by having it explain it to you. Unless I understand every single line, I basically always have the LLM explain what it just did. In fact, I interrogate the hell out of any code that it writes, and if anything smells a little suspicious or it contradicts itself, then I know I need to keep digging and maybe refer to the docs and double check, like, why is it doing that? Is it just making things up? If you notice that it's suggesting a lot of wrong things about like a particular dependency, for example, like it's just like talking about methods that don't even exist, then that's an indication that there's just not enough training data on what you're asking it to build. This is a great situation to go and refer to the actual documentation. In fact, you can feed the documentation to your LLM. Just copy, a particular article and say, hey, based on this documentation, if I want to do this, how do I do that? Or better yet, ask the LLM about the actual source code. I have often just like downloaded the source code of a particular package and been like, what's up with this? How does this work? Now, I really want to point out that everything that I'm describing right now it's more of an art than a science, all right? And, all of this stuff is still new, so nobody really has like clear best practices just yet that have been vetted by time, but it is experience, all right, that will refine your ability to sniff out hallucinations. Now, last thing I want to mention, and I'm just planting a seed here. I'm not gonna dive into this, but there is a safer and better way of using AI agents to build your software, and the answer is sandbox environments. But that's for another video. So, in conclusion, vibe coding is not a silver bullet, but nor is it just a silly fad for non-technical people. It's an incredibly useful practice that should be used thoughtfully and with a pinch of salt. Anyways, thank you for indulging me on this rather trendy topic. I just got back from a conference and, what tech conference doesn't talk about AI? And so this was kind of on my mind. So I wanted to put this out there. It's a little more casual, a little more opinionated. Anyways, as always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.